Her stepsister turned her husband against her, but the truth broke him, and what happened next is something she never expected. Stick with me while I share my story, and if it touches you, don't forget to support our channel by hitting that subscribe button, dropping a like, and sharing it with the people you care about. My name is Olivia Bennett, and I thought my life was perfect. I was married to Ethan Carter, a kind and successful architect, and we had a comfortable home in a quiet neighborhood. We shared everything, dreams, plans, and small everyday moments that made life feel complete. I believed our love was strong enough to face anything. But I was wrong. Madeline Bennett, my stepsister, was always around, smiling and pretending to care. On the surface, she seemed sweet and loving, but I didn't know she carried a secret bitterness toward me. She watched me, studied me, and quietly built a plan to take away everything I had. At first, I didn't notice anything unusual. I thought Madeline's friendliness was genuine. The first signs were small. Ethan seemed distracted sometimes, his smiles a little forced, and his patience wearing thin. I brushed it off, thinking he was tired from work or stressed about new projects. But deep down, I felt a change. Something didn't feel right. I couldn't put my finger on it, but I knew I had to pay attention. Madeline knew exactly what she was doing. She began planting doubts subtly, asking innocent questions that seemed harmless at first. She hinted at things Ethan didn't know about me, made me seem careless or secretive, and suggested that maybe I wasn't completely honest. I didn't understand why she would do this, and I certainly didn't think Ethan would believe her. I was wrong again. One evening, I noticed Ethan sitting silently in the living room, staring at nothing, and when I tried to ask him about his day, he shrugged and said, "I don't know, maybe you can tell me." The tone was sharp, almost accusing, and it hit me harder than I expected. I tried to laugh it off, to tell myself I was imagining things, but the coldness in his eyes was impossible to ignore. I realized slowly that Madeline had started turning Ethan against me. I couldn't believe it. How could someone I trusted so much be so cruel? How could my own stepsister feel such hate for me? And more importantly, how could the man I loved start believing lies about me? I decided I couldn't panic or react angrily. I had to understand what was happening, gather my thoughts, and figure out how to protect my marriage. I had to watch, listen, and wait for the truth to reveal itself. Little did I know, this was just the beginning of a journey that would test my heart, my patience, and my strength in ways I never imagined. Even in the first moments of betrayal, I felt a quiet determination rise inside me. I wouldn't let this ruin me. I knew one thing for sure. The truth always finds a way, and when it does, it changes everything. After the first signs of tension, I began noticing small changes in Ethan. He was quieter than usual, sometimes snapping over things that didn't matter. His smiles became rare, and he seemed lost in thought more often than before. I tried to talk to him about it, but he would shrug or change the subject, leaving me feeling uneasy and unsure of what was happening. At the same time, Madeline's presence became harder to ignore. She always had a reason to visit, often offering advice or asking questions about my life in a way that felt almost innocent. But the more I paid attention, the more I realized her words were carefully chosen to make Ethan doubt me. She would mention things I had said in passing, twisting them into suggestions that I was hiding something or being careless. One afternoon, while Ethan and I were having coffee, Madeline casually brought up a story about a friend whose partner had kept secret. She didn't directly accuse me, but the timing and tone made Ethan frown. I could see the seed of doubt planting itself in his mind, even though I hadn't done anything wrong. I felt my chest tighten. Other times, she would exaggerate minor incidents. If I forgot to mention a meeting or misremembered a detail, she would later suggest to Ethan that it might mean I was being dishonest or hiding something. Ethan began asking questions that felt unusual, questions about my friends, my work, and even my daily routines. I answered honestly every time, but I noticed the distance growing between us. I started feeling confused and hurt. I couldn't understand why Ethan was suddenly suspicious or why Madeline would act this way. I tried talking to him gently, asking if he had concerns, but he would often brush it off or act frustrated. I felt a growing sadness, but I still trusted him. I believed in our love and thought that somehow the tension would pass. Meanwhile, Madeline's manipulation continued quietly. She knew how to keep her interference subtle enough that I couldn't prove anything. She smiled, acted concerned, and pretended to care, all while slowly driving a wedge between Ethan and me. Every time I saw her, I felt a mix of unease and anger, but I had no clear way to confront her without making things worse. I began paying closer attention to Ethan's reactions, noticing the way he would hesitate before speaking to me or glance at Madeline when she was around. I felt a quiet fear building inside me, the fear that our relationship was being poisoned from the inside. Even though I couldn't see the full extent yet, I knew one thing. I had to stay strong and patient, because the real battle had only just begun. Every day, I clung to the hope that Ethan would trust me, that he would see through whatever Madeline was doing. But with every small comment and every planted doubt, the distance between us grew, and I felt my heart slowly being tested in ways I had never imagined. Things started to get worse. Madeline didn't stop at planting small doubts. She began creating situations that made it look like I was hiding something from Ethan. I found out later that she had been twisting innocent moments into evidence of me being unfaithful. She would tell Ethan half-truths, leaving out details that would prove my honesty. At first, I couldn't understand why Ethan was acting differently. He had always been the man who trusted me completely, who never questioned my word. But now, he hesitated before answering me, paused when I spoke, and sometimes looked at me with a mix of confusion and suspicion. It was like I was a stranger in my own marriage. One evening, I tried to bring it up directly. I asked Ethan if something was bothering him, and I explained how I felt hurt by the distance between us. Instead of listening, he waved it off and said I was overthinking. His words cut deeper than any argument could because I could feel that part of him was already believing Madeline over me. I began noticing patterns in his behavior. He would check in more often, not because he cared, but because he was anxious. He asked questions about where I went, who I talked to, and what I was doing, always with a tone that suggested doubt. Every time I tried to explain or reassure him, he seemed unconvinced. The worst part was realizing that someone close to both of us was doing this on purpose. Madeline had found ways to make every interaction suspicious, to make me seem like the problem. She smiled and acted innocent in front of us, but behind the scenes, she was carefully controlling the story Ethan was hearing. I felt a heavy weight in my chest. I didn't know how to stop it, and I didn't know who to turn to. My home, which had always felt safe, now felt tense and unpredictable. I loved Ethan, but I could see the trust we had built slowly unraveling. Despite everything, I refused to act impulsively. I watched and listened, paying attention to the small details that might reveal the truth. I knew someone was poisoning our relationship, but I couldn't yet identify the source. Each day, the tension grew, and I felt more alone, even in my own house. I reminded myself to stay calm. Reacting angrily would only make Ethan doubt me more. I had to find the truth and show it to him, even if it took time. Somewhere beneath the confusion and the hurt, I felt a quiet determination. I would uncover the betrayal, and I would make sure that the lies didn't destroy the love we had built together. Even in the face of growing suspicion and heartbreak, I clung to the hope that the truth would eventually come to light, and that justice, slow but inevitable, would reach Madeline for the cruelty she was spreading in our lives. By now, it was clear that Ethan believed Madeline. The warmth and trust that had once filled our home were gone. He started keeping his distance, spending more time in his office or staying late at work. Even when he was home, he seemed cold and detached. We no longer shared meals or conversations like we used to. The bed we once shared felt empty on one side as he began sleeping separately. The small arguments started too. They weren't about real problems, but about things that felt trivial at first. How I spent my day, whether I remembered to do certain chores, or who I talked to at work. But the arguments were sharp, laced with suspicion, and they left me exhausted and heartbroken. Every word seemed to push us further apart, and I couldn't understand how someone I loved so much could doubt me so completely. I felt completely alone. I tried to reach out, to explain, to show Ethan that I was still the same loyal wife, but every attempt seemed to backfire. Each day felt heavier, and the love that had once been so strong now felt fragile and distant. I couldn't even confide in my family because they didn't see the tension at home, and I was afraid they wouldn't understand the depth of Madeline's manipulation. Finally, I turned to my best friend, Jenna Harris. She had always been a voice of reason in my life, someone I could trust without hesitation. When I told her everything, from Madeline's subtle manipulations to Ethan's growing coldness, she listened carefully, nodding and asking questions that helped me see the situation clearly. Jenna told me that bitterness and anger would only hurt me in the end. She reminded me that the best way to handle betrayal was to stay strong, keep my dignity, and focus on uncovering the truth. She encouraged me not to let Madeline's lies destroy my life or my sense of self. Her words gave me a spark of hope, a reminder that I still had control over how I respond. I realized then that I had two choices. I could give up, sink into despair, and let Madeline win, or I could fight quietly and carefully to prove the truth. I chose the latter. I began paying closer attention to everything, how Madeline interacted with Ethan, what she said behind my back, and how he reacted. I started documenting small things, keeping mental notes of lies and inconsistencies, knowing that evidence would be my weapon when the time was right. Even in this low point, I felt a growing determination. I couldn't force Ethan to trust me yet, but I could prepare. I could protect myself and find a way to reveal the truth so completely that there would be no room for doubt. It was painful to feel isolated and betrayed, but I knew that this struggle was shaping me, making me stronger and more aware of the power of truth and patience. I realized I couldn't keep waiting for Ethan to see the truth on his own. I had to find out what Madeline was doing behind my back. Quietly, I began observing her, paying attention to her words, actions, and the little hints that never added up before. At first, it was subtle, a tone in her voice, a glance that didn't match her smile. But the more I watched, the more patterns I started to notice. One evening, while tidying up the guest room where Madeline often stayed, I found letters she had left behind, meant to be private. They weren't just casual notes. They were full of jealousy, anger, and manipulation. She had written about me as if I were a problem to be solved, plotting ways to make Ethan doubt my loyalty. Reading them made my heart ache, but it also gave me clarity. I began paying closer attention to conversations she had with Ethan. At first, I thought I was imagining things, but then I started hearing how she twisted words, how she made small exaggerations sound like major events. She would bring up things I had said in confidence and present them in a way that suggested dishonesty. Even minor lies, when repeated carefully, had begun to poison Ethan's mind. Each discovery made me more aware of the depth of her jealousy. It wasn't just a passing annoyance. It was a calculated plan to ruin my life and take what I had. The realization was painful, but it also gave me a sense of control. I finally understood that Ethan wasn't fully aware of what was happening, and that the blame for the distance in our relationship lay with Madeline, not with me. With every piece of evidence, I started to see things clearly. The heartbreak I had been feeling, the isolation, the doubts, the arguments, wasn't a reflection of my actions. It was the result of someone else's scheme. Knowing this didn't make the pain disappear, but it shifted my mindset. I moved from confusion and sadness to clarity and determination. I also realized something important. I couldn't save Ethan while he was still believing Madeline over me. No amount of pleading or explaining would reach him until the truth was undeniable. This was a hard truth to accept. The man I loved was lost in someone else's lies, and for now, I had to focus on exposing the deception rather than trying to convince him emotionally. Even in the middle of heartbreak, I felt a spark of strength. I understood that I couldn't let Madeline control my life, and I couldn't let Ethan's doubt define me. I began planning carefully, thinking about how to reveal the truth so completely that there would be no room for doubt. This moment of revelation was a turning point. I was no longer just the hurt wife. I was someone who could act, someone who could take control of the situation, and someone who would make sure the lies didn't win. The path ahead was difficult, but for the first time, I felt prepared to face it. By the time I understood Madeline's full plan, I knew I couldn't confront Ethan without being completely prepared. I needed proof, something undeniable that would show him the truth and expose Madeline's manipulation. I decided to take a careful, strategic approach rather than act out of anger or desperation. I started collecting everything that could show her lies. I kept emails she had sent Ethan that twisted my words, notes she had written that revealed her jealousy, and small financial inconsistencies that hinted at her attempts to interfere in our lives. Every little detail mattered, and I documented it all. Next, I began talking quietly to people who had witnessed her behavior. A neighbor who had overheard her making critical comments about me, a colleague of Ethan's who had noticed strange conversations, even our family members who had seen her acting overly concerned while actually planting doubt. All of these perspectives helped me build a clear picture of her manipulation. As I gathered proof, I also thought carefully about timing. Confronting Ethan too soon could backfire. He still believed her lies in part, and I didn't want emotions to cloud the truth. I needed a plan that would allow him to see everything clearly, without Madeline being able to twist it again. I created a folder with every piece of evidence, organizing it so that the story would unfold logically. Emails were in order, witnesses were prepared to explain what they saw, and notes were highlighted to show her jealousy and intent. I wanted the truth to hit in a way that left no room for doubt. While preparing, I also reflected on my own strength. This wasn't just about proving Madeline wrong, it was about reclaiming my own power. For too long, I had been on the defensive, hurt and confused. Now I was the one in control, quietly preparing to turn the situation around. I imagined how the confrontation would go. Ethan would see all the evidence, realize the betrayal, and understand that I had remained honest and loyal throughout. Madeline would be exposed not through accusations, but through facts. It wasn't revenge for revenge's sake. It was justice, and it was necessary to protect my marriage and my dignity. Every day I worked quietly, making sure I didn't give any hints to either of them. I practiced staying calm, speaking clearly, and presenting the truth without emotion clouding the facts. I knew this would be the most important moment of my life, and I couldn't risk it failing because of impulsiveness. By the time I finished my preparation, I felt a mix of nervousness and quiet confidence. I knew the truth would shock Ethan and finally reveal Madeline for who she truly was. Most importantly, I felt empowered. I wasn't a victim anymore. I was ready to face the betrayal, expose it fully, and take back control of my life. This plan wasn't about anger. It was about justice, clarity, and strength. And for the first time since all of this began, I felt like I had the power to turn everything around. I decided it was time to act. I invited Ethan and Madeline to our home for what I told them would be a casual dinner. Everything looked normal. Plates set, candles lit, the kind of evening that should feel warm and calm. But underneath, I was ready to reveal the truth and show them both exactly what had been happening. Once we sat down, I waited for the right moment. I started talking casually, asking how their day had been, keeping my tone calm and neutral. I didn't want to seem accusatory or emotional at first. Then, slowly, I brought out the folder I had prepared, placing it on the table where both of them could see it. I began explaining, step by step, what I had discovered. I showed Ethan the emails where Madeline twisted my words, the notes revealing her jealousy, and the small inconsistencies she had created to make me look dishonest. I brought in witnesses' statements and everything else I had collected. I spoke calmly, clearly, and without anger, letting the evidence speak for itself. Ethan's expression changed almost immediately. At first, there was confusion, then shock, and finally a dawning realization. His eyes widened as he read the emails and notes, listening to the proof I had gathered. I could see the pieces of the puzzle finally coming together in his mind. The man who had doubted me so completely was now seeing the truth for the first time. Madeline's reaction was very different. She went pale, her confident smile fading, her voice trembling as she tried to explain herself. But no amount of excuses could undo the clear, documented truth before. I stayed calm, maintaining control, refusing to let her panic or lies intimidate me. As Ethan looked from the evidence to me, I saw the regret and guilt in his eyes. He realized he had been deceived, that he had unfairly doubted me, and that I had remained loyal all along. I didn't yell or cry. I simply let him absorb the truth. I could feel the shift in the room, the tension easing as reality set in. Madeline tried one last time to deny or twist the story, but I remained composed. I spoke with quiet confidence, pointing out the clear pattern of her jealousy and manipulation. There was no room for argument. The truth was undeniable. By the end of the evening, Ethan was silent, stunned, and struggling to find words. He apologized, though I didn't respond immediately. My focus wasn't on forgiveness yet. It was on showing that I had remained strong, that I had uncovered the betrayal, and that I was no longer a victim. For the first time since all this began, I felt a sense of relief. The confrontation had gone exactly as I planned. The truth had been revealed, and I had reclaimed my power. Ethan saw the reality, and Madeline's schemes were finally exposed. That night, I felt a quiet strength that I hadn't felt before, knowing I had faced the betrayal and stood firm through it all. After the confrontation, Ethan sat in silence, staring at the table and the folder of evidence. The shock on his face slowly gave way to guilt, and then to shame. He couldn't stop replaying everything in his mind. How he had doubted me, how he had let Madeline's lies cloud his judgment, and how he had treated me with suspicion instead of trust. Finally, he looked at me, his voice trembling as he tried to speak. Olivia, I don't even know what to say. I'm so sorry. I should have trusted you. I was blind and I hurt you. I can't believe I let her manipulate us. I listened quietly, feeling the weight of his words, but I didn't respond right away. His apology mattered, but it didn't erase the pain. The trust that had taken years to build had been broken in a matter of weeks. The hurt wasn't just about what he had believed. It was about how it changed the way he treated me, how he allowed someone else to come between us, and how I had felt isolated and heartbroken in my own home. I finally spoke, my voice calm but firm. Ethan, love isn't just about feeling. Love needs trust. You let someone else plant lies in our marriage, and you believe them over me. That's not just betrayal. It's a choice to let someone else control how you see me, how you see us. And that's what hurts the most. He flinched at my words, his shame deepening. I continued, needing him to understand the weight of what had happened. I stayed loyal to you through all of it, even when you doubted me. I gave you my honesty, my heart, and my trust. And you let it be poisoned by her lies. You need to understand that before anything can be fixed, you have to truly see the damage that was done. Ethan's eyes filled with tears. He tried again to apologize, reaching for my hand, but I gently pulled back. Forgiveness couldn't be rushed. I needed him to understand that saying sorry wasn't enough. He needed to earn back the trust he had broken, and that would take time, reflection, and real change. He stayed quiet after that, listening as I spoke about the betrayal, the isolation, and the heartbreak. I explained how deeply it affected me, not just emotionally, but in the way I had felt about our life together. My words were meant to show him the seriousness of what had happened, to make him realize that trust isn't something that can be taken for granted. That night, Ethan learned the full weight of his action. The regret was visible in every part of him, his expression, his voice, and even his posture. And though I didn't forgive him immediately, I knew that by making him truly feel the consequences of his choices, he could begin to understand what it really meant to betray someone he loved. I felt a mixture of sadness and quiet strength. I had faced the truth, exposed the betrayal, and now I was giving him the chance to reflect on his mistakes while I held firm in my own strength. Once the truth was out, I realized I couldn't let Madeline continue to have power over anyone's life, including mine. The way she had manipulated Ethan and tried to destroy my marriage showed me how dangerous her influence could be. I knew I had to act carefully, using the evidence I had gathered to stop her without lowering myself to her level. I decided to handle everything legally and firmly. I consulted with a lawyer to see what steps could be taken to protect myself and make sure her manipulations couldn't harm me or Ethan again. I presented all the documents, emails, and witness statements I had collected, creating a clear case that demonstrated her pattern of deceit and interference. The process was methodical, and I stayed calm, knowing that the truth would speak louder than anger ever could. At the same time, I began addressing the social circles where Madeline had influence. I didn't humiliate her or make public accusations, but I made it clear to anyone who had been affected that I was aware of the lies and manipulation. I shared the truth with people in a calm, honest way, showing the facts without drama. This not only protected my reputation, but also ensured Madeline could no longer use charm or half-truths to control how others saw me. Going through this process wasn't easy. I felt a mix of anger, sadness, and determination. But with each step, I felt stronger. Every piece of evidence I presented, every careful conversation I had, reminded me that I was no longer a victim. I had taken control of the situation and reclaimed my life. I also spent time rebuilding my inner strength. I focused on my career, my friendships, and the things that made me happy independent of Ethan or Madeline. I rediscovered the confidence I had lost during the months of betrayal. The pain had been deep, but it had also taught me resilience. I learned that betrayal doesn't have to destroy someone. It can reveal hidden strength and clarity. By the time everything was resolved, I felt a sense of peace I hadn't known for months. Madeline's influence over my life was gone, and I had proven to myself that I could face manipulation, heartbreak, and betrayal without losing my dignity or power. I had reclaimed my life on my own terms. Most importantly, I felt proud of the way I handled everything. I didn't respond with revenge and anger or humiliation. I responded with strategy, patience, and integrity. That made the outcome even stronger. I had faced betrayal, exposed it fully, and emerged not only intact but more confident and independent than before. Through it all, I learned that strength comes from facing the truth, standing firm, and refusing to let someone else define your life. Madeline had tried to destroy me, but in the end, I became stronger, wiser, and free from the control she had sought to impose. I was finally in control of my own happiness. After everything had been exposed and Madeline's manipulations were no longer a threat, Ethan tried to make amends. He apologized repeatedly, expressing regret for doubting me and for letting someone else come between us. He wanted to rebuild the trust that had been broken, hoping to restore what we once had. But I realized that some wounds run too deep to fully heal. Trust, once broken in a marriage, cannot always return to the way it was. I could see his sincerity, but I also understood that forgiveness alone wouldn't erase the months of doubt, pain, and betrayal. I had to think about myself first, my peace, my dignity, and my future. I made a choice to prioritize my self-respect over rushing into forgiveness. It wasn't easy. I loved Ethan, and part of me wanted to go back to the life we had before all of this. But I knew that moving forward meant focusing on my own growth and happiness, not clinging to someone who had let doubt and manipulation weaken our bond. I began building a new chapter of my life, one centered on myself. I invested more in my passions, my friendships, and my career. I traveled, tried new things, and focused on becoming the person I wanted to be, independent of anyone else's actions or opinions. For the first time in months, I felt a sense of freedom and clarity. Through this journey, I also reflected on what I had learned. Betrayal had been painful, but it had revealed my strength. It had taught me patience, resilience, and the importance of standing up for myself. I realized that I didn't need someone else's approval to feel worthy, and that my happiness didn't have to depend on anyone who had once doubted me. Ethan remained in my life, but our relationship had changed. We could communicate and respect each other, but I no longer relied on him for validation or security. I had grown strong enough to know that my value wasn't tied to anyone else's perception of me. Looking back, I understood the deeper lesson in all of this. Sometimes the people closest to you can hurt you the most, whether intentionally or not. And yet, the truth always finds a way to surface, revealing what really matters. Pain and betrayal, while difficult, can become the foundation for personal growth and empowerment. I felt a quiet pride in how far I had come. I had faced manipulation, heartbreak, and doubt, and I had emerged stronger, wiser, and more independent. I had reclaimed my life, my confidence, and my joy. And most importantly, I knew that no one could take that away from me again. Sometimes the people closest to you can hurt you the most, but the truth always finds a way, and strength is born from betrayal.